Meet Sam Bloom, the guy redefining marketing partnerships at PMG while juggling sports fandom and Adtech chaos like a pro. From transforming Dallas Stars fandom to navigating the absurd trends of modern advertising, Sam's got stories, insights, and a whole lot of wit. Ready to hear how he keeps the circus running without losing his mind? Let's get into it.
Deserve to win when it matters most. Facing multi-billion-dollar bet the company litigation. No problem. That's why we're here. Troutman Amin, LLP is a true legal
Welcome back to the
powerhouse.
ADOTAT Show. Today we're diving into the mind of Sam Bloom, the guy who's somehow juggling marketing chaos, sports innovation, and his role at PMG's head of partnerships without spilling a drop. Ever wonder how to survive in an industry whose trends change faster than a toddler's mood? Or what it's like to blend Dallas Stars fandom with next-gen streaming? Grab a seat because Sam's spilling his secrets on everything from blocking shots in sports marketing to keeping sane in the three-ring circus of Adtech. Let's get into it now. So Sam, how are you doing? I know you've had a hard couple of weeks, but how are you really doing?
You know, I would say I'm más o menos, but, you know, I will say, like all things, you just got to trudge on, you know. So I appreciate you asking that. And look, it's a fun time in this industry. So there are lots of, you know, things to lean into.
So managing marketing these days feels like running a three-ring circus where the lines are loose, the acrobats are on strike, and someone keeps setting the popcorn machines on fire. Is this exactly what you signed up for, or is this chaos is where you thrive?
Well, I think the most important thing is when you think about the circus, the best view of the circus is above the circus. And I try very hard to make sure that we have a perspective that's, you know, 50,000 feet above the circus. And I think if you are inside the tent, and, you know, it can be very distracting. So I think that's the first piece is I look for, you know, big things that I want to go focus on and that are big trends and that I think of as big waves, and, you know, try to surf those. And it's just as important to decide on what you want to do versus what you don't want to do. That's really important. But I definitely feel like I'm driving the clown car on any given day.
There's a plane coming out your ear. The screen.
That's awesome. That's probably a Southwest plane because Love Field is just right behind us.
I saw it go in one ear and it came right out the other.
That's hilarious.
I had to say something.
That's awesome.
So you called marketing a higher calling before. Are we talking Jedi Knight levels here?
Well, look, it's interesting. So I'll give you a little bit of background on that. So, you know, when I joined Camelot 20 plus years ago, the founder of Camelot, Tom Callahar, had been through, you know, PMG, then Dr. Pepper 7-Up, and then he started the agency. And it was interesting the way he sort of framed why he got in the business. He felt like media was a way to have a 12-month relationship with the client, but he felt like we were really a marketing agency and media was just the way we had the relationship with the client and the way we serviced the client. And so we spent a lot of time around, you know, marketing strategy, understanding customer insights, understanding competitors, understanding channels. And I always felt like it was a second MBA for me, but I always felt like when we started to build our digital practice, I looked at that and I said, that's really interesting because I think if we get so tactical, you know, we'll be commoditized. And so I always felt like leaning into marketing strategy was the place to be because I think that's where some of the biggest mistakes are, to be honest with you. It's literally at the inception of the strategy.
Do you think marketing will ever get above the corporate drudgery?
I'll tell you, Ed, it's hard not to be cynical at this point in time. I mean, and all you got to do is look at the tenure of the CMO or whatever they're calling that job now. I mean, to be honest with you. So I do think, look, I mean, I think what's interesting is, you know, I think there's a lot of people confused. There's a lot of tactical things in our business that we call marketing, but they're really just, you know, projects and project management. And so the best marketers out there are still people trying to change hearts and minds and understand customers' needs and build really good propositions. At the end of the day, I think that will always be the higher calling of marketing. Now, the channels and the communication techniques that you have to try to influence consumers, that may change. It's a fashion, you know, and I believe that's our job as marketers is, you know, we're in a fashion business and to understand, you know, and we're in fast fashion, by the way. So we've got to be able to be nimble and adaptable to the techniques for marketing to consumers. But I think that higher calling is durable, in my opinion.
So what's the most absurd trend you've seen lately? Do we really believe that TikTok dances can sell life insurance?
Look, I think it's funny. I was probably, there are a gazillion things that I look at and I go, that seems silly, to me. Influencers are a great example, and creators are a great example. I've seen a lot of brands have a lot of success with them. And I think it's a function of, some of it is viewing it as a 57-year-old cranky dude is different than when you're, trying to sell insurance to a 24-year-old who's grown up on these things. So I always try to put take off my cranky old dude hat and put on the other hat and try to understand kind of what the consumer, has been reared on, because for them, it seems very normal. And just as a side note, there was a time in a day, in our, during you and I, I think you're a fellow cranky old dude too. But remember, we had just seen on TV, those kinds of ads. Right. You had DJs, and I mean, I don't think this is new. I think it's just expressed differently in a different channel. And I think, we grew up on watching Gilligan's Island, and there were infomercials on there too. So I don't see this as massive changes. I do see channels and expressions of these things being different. Do I think it's absurd? There are times when I think the problem is we are in a marketplace that everyone copies it's such a bandwagon effect. So the problem is that it's effective until it's not, right? And because everybody does it, and then you don't stand out. And I think that's the challenge. It's the Ricky Bobby theory of marketing. If you're not first, you're last. And I think that's the problem.
We live in an age of distraction where attention is the rarest commodity we have. Yet while consumer behavior has evolved, the way we talk to them on TV has hardly changed in 50 years. How can you expect success if viewers aren't paying attention to the screen? Origin has all the solutions for attention, consideration, and outcomes.
Well, I think of like the demure trend, for example. It's so bad. It's basically look at me in the worst way possible. One person did it, and then everyone did it, and now there's no differentiation.
That's right. And I think, look, that's our job as marketers, is to figure out how you stand out. By the way, to me, that's the piece around innovation that's really important. So it is about riding the wave, and then, once you get off that wave, everybody else is trying to catch the same thing afterwards. So I think that's ultimately the challenge of what we've got here is, helping clients stand out in what is, a very, very commoditized marketplace.
So what if your clients want to stick to these outdated strategies like cats on a curtain? How do you convince them? Is it Jedi mind tricks?
No, it's facts. And look, I think I've always thought data is the single most compelling thing. And I think you start with, ground truths. By the way, I think you just saw another plane coming out.
Yeah, we just saw another one. Yeah, I'm probably going to post-edit with little circles.
Yes, so thank you. Now I'm noticing it. So, I think that there's...
Retail media in 2024. It's like juggling ads, budgets, and a whole lot of guesswork. Sound familiar?
Enter Incremental, the marketing measurement tool that tells you what's working without the spaghetti mess. We're not here to guess. We're here to measure smartly, incremental, because your campaigns deserve answers, not assumptions. Visit incremental.com and start marketing like you mean it.
We always start with ground truths and basic facts, and we work really hard on that. And I think it's, customer data, and when I say customer data, I'm talking about, truly understanding who their customers are, where they are, how they consume media, all those kinds of things. I still think that works. And your earlier question about kind of marketing, I think people are so focused on the tasks of marketing that they forget about the art of marketing and what we're really, there to do. So they don't spend a lot of time thinking about who, where, when, why, all the time. And I do think that that is a moment where we get an opportunity to agree on basic facts. I always think, by the way, that's the breaking of the bread with the client. And I believe that's the first head nod that you get when you agree on the information that's in front of you.
So we know every great story starts with, remember when we totally messed up. So tell me about a campaign that went so off the rails, it ended up in a different zip code.
All right, so I got to go back. This will date me. So I worked at Blockbuster, believe it or not. So I helped start Blockbuster Online. And, I also ran sort of our ran business development, so I did all of our investments. And eventually got traded to the agency. But one of the first campaigns we did for Blockbuster, it was a big deal. And I remember buying a gazillion homepages, and what we would do is we would do lots of landing page testing off of homepages and things like that. Well, we totally messed up and got the wrong, at the time, I want to say they called them like a menu or something along those lines, where you would put various things together. We got it completely wrong. And the irony of the whole thing, it was the creatives were supposed to match the landing pages. We did the exact opposite. And the crazy part is one of the recipes of the landing page optimization actually outperformed the two that were alike, if you will. So it was the mismatch outperformed the ones that matched. And it totally blew my head off. And it was a happy mistake, but yet a mistake. So somebody had fat-fingered something into Offermatica back in the day, and lo and behold. And it was like a $500,000 mistake, by the way. I mean, it was a massive mistake, but it ended up being good. So
also with tech knocking like a persistent salesperson, which innovations do you actually let in, and which ones you pretend not to be home for?
Oh, that's a really good question. One is when companies come in the door, one is I think pretty hard about the problem they're trying to solve and who they're competing with. But I also think about ultimately, what are their pipes? What data do they own? Those kinds of things. I'll tell you, I have some general rules. I love companies that own first-party data and own their own data. I like it when they have a logged-in user. I like when there's scale, because when there's scale, there's targeting. And so those are all the kinds of things I look for. Now, not every startup basically has those criteria, but I think when you think about the world of ad tech, there's a lot of people selling a lot of things. They don't own anything. And I generally kind of ignore that noise for the most part. There are plenty of incredible entrepreneurs doing really interesting things that don't own all those things. But then I think very deeply about the problem they're trying to solve and trying to make sure it's a match with what clients need. And I think that is the ultimate, filter is ultimately, are you solving a client's problem? And if you solve that problem, what difference does it make in the business? And so, when we were running Camelot, we had 30 plus clients. Now here at PMG, hundreds of clients. It gets exponentially harder when you have that many clients. But, those are things we think a lot about. The verification business is a good example of one where it feels pretty broken. And so I'm looking, that's a good category where I'm looking at, okay, who's doing suitability or targeting smarter to avoid the bad stuff in order to get the good stuff. So, I'm certainly thinking about those kinds of problems. And so that's a good example. One, there are a bunch of new entrants with AI that are thinking about, how do you think about context and other kinds of things as signals versus keywords and those kinds of things. That's really interesting. That kind of stuff is very interesting to me because I can see that the machine can do context way better than humans, right? Way better. So that's one where I'm swimming in a bunch of companies and trying to determine who's viable, who's not.
So do you have a criteria for swiping left? And for those that don't know, and I had to look this up myself, that's for ugly people.
The answer is yes, I do. I would say, I don't know. I mean, I think some of it is, I think the biggest thing for me, and I'll give you a lesson I learned in the early days. I remember when we were looking at, for example, video partners, video SSPs back in the day, and video platforms. And I remember one of the platforms telling me to go talk to the SSPs ask them how bids varied across, the platforms to see if that, who was actually making changes in bid adjustments based off of audiences and other kinds of things. And I always think that's a really interesting question. So thinking about the downstream partners and asking not just doing an RFP, if you will, of those partners, but understanding the ecosystem and understand what people in the ecosystem say about that partner. And if you can see that the partners are validating that, that's very interesting. So I look at that. And the other piece is, I look at how people make money. I think, opacity tends to get flagged as a swipe left for me. Transparency is, a positive. Solving a client challenge is a positive. Somebody in that does something the same as everybody else gets swiped left. I mean, by the way, we have a simple question we ask people that I love to ask, which is, what do you do that's first, best, and only? And most people can't answer that question. They literally can't answer that question. Like, what is the thing you're famous for? And a lot of partners literally can't answer that question. It's because they do the same thing as everybody else. And
right.
It's another
I'm writing an article right now about DSPs, and that has been the focus of my article. I can't find what a lot of these new DSPs, how they differentiate. Like, what are they providing that I can't get from the trade desk? What are they providing that I can't get from DV360? And I can't find they do anything except make things harder and sometimes more expensive.
Well, that's a great category to talk about too, which is exactly that, which is, unfortunately, that world has become very commoditized. And, at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself how people make money and what their incentives are. And so, when it comes down to that, you're literally, it's a commoditized business. So, and if it's pricing, not so much. Right.
Let's switch lanes a little bit to sports. I noticed that you were a goalie, although it doesn't say for what. So I'm going to assume.
Yeah. So
hockey.
Hockey? I was a soccer goalie. So I played at the University of Virginia. My coach Bruce Arena told me I was the best Jewish goalie in Charlottesville, Virginia.
Were you also the only one?
At the time, I was the only one. He claimed that our sweeper was the best Jewish goalie in Charlottesville because he was truly good. But no, I played on, national teams, Olympic teams.
Oh, wow.
I played professionally at one point, or semi-professionally, I should say, because I was in between years when they didn't have a league. And the cohort that I came out with were spectacular players. The guy I played behind was a guy named Tony Miola. We had John Harkes, we had Jeff Vegas, we had Claudio Reina, a whole bunch of really good players in college. And so, but as I always say, goalies are not athletes, we're goalies. So, but when you get at that level, you have to be an athlete, and that sort of weeded me out.
So I want to go with that metaphor. Let's talk about blocking shots and marketing. With PMG's big play along the Dallas Stars and the Victory Plus streaming service, are we talking hat trick or a full-on championship? I say I use the metaphor for for hockey. I should have written a different sports metaphor.
No, hockey's great, by the way. A hat trick works in soccer as it does in hockey. So it works. So you have to go back about 4 or 5 months. And in the thing we were looking at was there were a tremendous amount of sports deals going on at the national level. And what you could see is fragmentation going on. Between, the NBA is probably the best example of it because that really got fragmented between multiple networks and, large media companies. But when you think about sports as on the whole, the NFL is an anomaly because it's all national. But even when you look inside of a matchup, what you find is the bulk of the ratings come from a couple of very large DMAs. The NFL is in 32 markets.
Right.
The matchups really define a lot of the, people aren't just watching out of the goodwill of watching football, they're watching their team. Most of the consumption happens, sports is a local phenomenon. The NFL, because it's national, we tend to ignore it, the local pace of it. But when you go look at baseball, hockey, and basketball, 15 to 25% of the revenue in those leagues is from their local TV contracts. And of course, if you've been following the Diamond and Bally's sports dilemma, over the last 2 or 3 years, if you were in a market, Bally's market, it was very, very hard to see the content. And so along come the Dallas Stars. The stadium they play in the American Airlines Center is 2 blocks that way.
Right.
And when the announcement came out that they were the first team, not only in hockey, not only in the U.S., but globally, to own their own media rights, I thought that was interesting. And, hockey, the bar is kind of low as it relates to ratings and whatnot. And so it was very easy to, pick up the phone and call, our local team and sort of talk to them about it. And I learned a bunch of things. So first, the Dallas Stars, of all the teams in hockey, have the largest physical footprint, geographic footprint. They have a 4-state, footprint that's very interesting.
Right.
It's almost 40 million households.
Well, now they also have Arizona.
That's right.
Since we got rid of our team, unfortunately.
That's right. And so the Stars joined up with a company called APMC to start something called Victory Plus. And Victory Plus is where teams can basically take their own media rights and stream directly to the fans. And what we were frustrated in this market was if you were Dallas Stars were pretty good last year. And if you wanted to watch a game, you either had to sign up on a pay-per-view on Bally's or you just couldn't get it at all. So what the Stars basically said is, hey, we're going to do something that's ad-supported. It's going to be free for fans. It's going to be on all devices. And by the way, you can, regardless of how, you can work with us in many different ways, whether you want to come in as a sponsorship level or you want to buy us programmatically, we're going to have something for everybody, and you go to one partner. So when you think about sports rights, you used to have to go through 5, 6, 7 different partners, the venue, the team, the media network, you go down the player, talent agencies, whatever. With the Stars, you go to one place and you can kind of go dream the dream. And you can use the marks for the team. You can work directly with the talent. So we thought that was interesting enough to create a lab with them for, our clients. And so our bet is not necessarily on the Stars. Our bet is this kind of direct-to-fan model, we think for sports is very, very interesting. And, the early read on it is amazing because they're getting 4, 5, 6x the consumption of the games that they had, during the Bally's era. But more importantly, what's really interesting is it's increased digital engagement massively. And so that's the key piece of this. It's all being delivered digitally. So there are things you can do as an advertiser that are very, very different that you couldn't do in the linear equivalent. And so we think it's a pretty interesting model. Now, I don't think all sports leagues and all teams will go this way, but you can bet your ass that everyone in the world is kind of watching this experiment that's in the sports business because they're wondering what happens when you own your own data. What happens when you own your own channels? What happens when you own your own content? All those sort of things. And so it makes a ton of sense. And so while it may not be the case for every sport now that will, go this way, I think in time you will see rights holders will eventually want to take back those rights. Those other sports that I mentioned, baseball, football, even basketball, for them to walk away from their TV contracts is very expensive today. So the economics have to have changed enough in a business for someone to say, I'm topping out. Hockey economics aren't the same as the other sports. So it's really interesting. It's a lot of fun. I love the Stars, and I love organizations that bet on themselves. And the Stars are betting on themselves. And so we're all in.
Any unexpected fumbles?
On this particular one?
Yeah.
I would tell you, look, I mean, with all, things, it's education. And I think, when people understand the situation or the context of this, I haven't had anybody say, your thinking is wrong on this. What I hear more often than not is, Dallas isn't, an important market to me, or that's just local sports. That's what I hear. But people don't understand sports is local. I mean, that's the nature of it. I mean, its fandom is very local or regional. So I would tell you, in any kind of thing like this, from a programmatic standpoint, there's a lot of pipes that have to get built. There are things that work and don't work. Live games are hard relative to on-demand content. Pod positions are hard. A lot of that is just being formulated in the programmatic world, and some of the latest, things that you're seeing coming out around programmatic video. I mean, pod positions aren't really defined. So that will come, all of that piping will come. So
the direct-to-fan model seems like a backstage pass for everyone. Do you think this will truly revolutionize fan engagement, or are we just adding more selfie opportunities?
Well, so I think it does. So the analogy I give is, look what the Manning cast has done for Monday Night Football, and it's brought in a whole different set of fans. And so take a team like the Dallas Stars. What happens when you do a hockey simulcast that's in Spanish? Why? Because we have, a high percentage of Hispanics in, North Texas and across, the Stars footprint. Or what if you did, a simulcast with the wives of the hockey players, wives and girlfriends of the hockey players? I think there's a chance to expand audiences. And I also think when you think about fandom today, I'm a Premier League fan as a good example. I get up generally Saturday mornings and I watch games, but many times I miss them. When I go to Peacock, I can go watch the game in 10 minutes. And so you can go watch the key plays of the game and go do that. So I think when we think about fandom is not just simply watching the game end to end. Fandom is much deeper than that. And all you got to do is look at Hard Knocks or any, All for Nothing or All or Nothing, which is on Amazon. I mean, there's a whole bunch of shows behind the scenes things. Fans want that. And then, that takes you down the road of unscripted documentaries or reality or all kinds of stuff. I think the sky's the limit here. I do think there will be economics associated with it, but I think generally the way I think about it is fandom is a much bigger tent than simply the live broadcast. And I think if we narrow it to that, it will be, pretty binary. I think the direct to fan model is occurring in every sport, but some of it is better than others. I mean, the example I give is we're talking to some companies, for example, in the UK, and they said, some of the top football teams in the UK have incredible Facebook presence, incredible audiences, but they don't own one single piece of data in there, not one. And so they presume that a like is equal to a fan, and that is not necessarily true. So I think when you start to think about the direct-to-fan model, it's much bigger than that. So I think my personal opinion, I think it's something we wanted to go really deep on and learn on, because I think fandom is a much broader thing than we.
So if you could secure any dream sponsorship deal, what would it be? And can we expect a Sam Bloom arena in the near future?
Well, look, I mean, if I could, so I'll tell you, since soccer is my love,
right?
Anything involving international soccer, I'll just put it out there, I'm in. You will not be getting a Sam Bloom arena anytime soon. You may not even get a Sam Bloom look, I mean, as it relates to sports, I mean, it's a big practice area for us at PMG. And, I think the bigger thing to think about is, when you think about in general, the sports world is now more digital than it is, not. And we think that's particularly interesting. And so, and that's how we're sort of attacking it. And I would sort of say in the agency world, it's traditionally been attacked from either, from a linear perspective or from a hospitality or, naming rights and those kinds of things. And all those sort of things will occur. I think the digital side and the digital exhaust around sports in that arena, super interesting. I mean, YouTube is a good example. I mean, it's probably the largest destination for sports, and they have deals with several of the leagues. So, and fandom looks very different in YouTube because, there's all kinds of fans. I mean, it's super interesting. So my arena would be a digital arena, if I were to answer the question directly.
So let's look forward to 10 years. Do you envision the relationship between sports teams and fans changing? Are we all going to be plugged into the matrix? Or are there still going to be good old-fashioned stadium cheers?
I think people love experiences, and so I think that will always exist. I do think digital will enhance the physical architecture of the experiences.
Right. More AR?
AR, I mean, look, I mean, it's really interesting. I mean, so I've had the pleasure, Jerry Jones, our controversial owner here in Dallas.
Right.
For all that you think about Jerry, the GM, Jerry, the owner, did some very interesting things. And one of the bigger things is they architected a stadium that had enough bandwidth to be able to, for people to actually connect to the Wi-Fi. That's not a small feat, getting 120,000 people connected to a network. And so that connectivity enables a lot of things, everything from food ordering to experiencing. And if you look around the world, you got a SoFi Stadium, the electronics and the signage in that stadium are, you go all the way across the pond to what's happening at Tottenham at the new White Hart Lane. Amazing. I mean, they can convert the field to, American football or European football. There's going to be technology and experiences happening with that. And so I think it will increase both fan engagement in the venue and outside of the venue. And this is one of the things, it's funny, we talk about this with the Stars piece. This is the stuff we wanted to learn about I'll give you a good example. One of the ideas that I really wanted to do with Stars is, hey, get a free AI, image with your favorite Stars players. You can do that whether you're in venue or outside of venue. Pretty nifty. So I think, to answer your question, I think there's going to be an amazing amount of experiential stuff, both, in the venue and outside the venue. And I think a fan engagement, people, sports is so tribal and will enable, true fans to really connect in all kinds of ways.
So let's take up to the three-ring circus that is modern advertising. If ads were carnival attractions, which one would be running the awe-inspiring trapeze act or the mysterious Hall of Mirrors? And how do you keep it real when there's so much smoke and mirrors in the industry?
It's a good question. And, it probably comes back to your first question, which is, I think you got to come back to what you're trying to do, which is, marketing. And at the end of the day, I think we have an over-reliance in our industry on platforms. And, people have to come up with sort of the marketing, the higher calling around marketing. The platforms should fall off of the higher calling. And so when I think about this, I don't want to say I oversimplify it. I say I just tune out a lot of stuff that doesn't matter at the circus.
So what's the biggest myth about advertising you'd like to break with a sledgehammer? Are we just really puppet masters or just pulling out hair behind the scenes?
Well, I think there's first of all, I always find there's a ton of myths in our business about a lot of things, and I think, people think, for example, linear TV is not measurable. That's not true. And people think because you can measure digital that somehow there's cause and effect. So right. I find, a lot of ironies in pretty much everything we're doing. And so, the founder of Camelot always used to say there's a difference between measurement and attribution. And this is before I understood what attribution really was. And really the context that he sort of thought about that is, you can certainly move the chairs on the deck any way you want them, but it doesn't, a lot of causal inferences can be made, but it may not be the thing that actually drives, the marketing program. And so I'm simplistic in that sense where I think that, we have so many myths in our business, but, all you got to do, I'll tell you what I do is I follow where the money is and I follow where the audiences are. And I think if you do those things, you'll be in a pretty good spot for the most part.
So everyone seems to be obsessed with metrics, but how do we actually measure success? And has anyone actually ever been impressed by impressions?
That's a really great question. And it's one that I think every marketer is struggling with right now. And this comes back to this question versus measurement versus attribution. And, I'll tell you, for a lot of our campaigns, for example, we do love to measure to outcomes. And what's an outcome like? I'll give you an example. In the QSR category, we're now able to connect a campaign exposure to actual credit card purchases in a particular, store or region. And that to me feels really solid and it feels really good. If I were reporting on KPIs like click-through rate, conversion rates, all that kind of stuff, I think it wouldn't tell the whole story. Ultimately, the folks that we work with, I always sort of say this in a very simplistic way, which is I've never met a marketer who didn't want to make the cash register ring. So at the end of the day, the cash register is the ultimate piece of this. Now, what I'll tell you is, going back to your previous question on things that really annoy me, there's this concept of brand marketing versus performance marketing. And I've never seen anybody that does brand marketing that doesn't want the cash register to ring. And I've never seen anybody that does performance marketing who doesn't want their brand to be held, in high regard. So I always think all clients are results oriented. And, what the things that make those cash registers sing is actually different by category. To your question and to your point about the singing video and TikTok about insurance, well, it's interesting. Something like 85% of people change their insurance provider every year. It's a huge number of people that are in market for insurance. So they're just trying to make sure they're the last voice in your head when you're going to pick, an insurance provider. That may work for them. And, I can't say that that's going to work for another category. That may not make you buy a car. It may not, define who your mortgage provider is or make you buy a jacket. I think every category, the thing that makes the consumer open up their wallet may be very different. I think that's the biggest piece in this is that, every year you got to relearn this business about what works and doesn't work in a particular category.
I want to change a little bit. Let's get introspective. If your leadership style was a gourmet dish, what would it be? Are we talking spicy jambalaya with a kick of sophisticated souffle that requires precise timing?
I would definitely be brisket tacos. Being here in Texas, yes, really good. It's such a comfort food. I debated on this, brisket tacos or enchiladas, because enchiladas are definitely my grief food, that I will tell you. But brisket tacos, it's the perfect thing. And, you can add your own spice or not add your own spice if you want.
Right. So does it
I
pair
choose spice.
well with? Does this pair well with any cocktail, or is it just mandatory for survival now?
Oh no, tequila. Oh, you got to go tequila, man. So we have something here called a Mexican martini. Some people know it as a lancerita. There's all kinds of things, but it's basically, tequila, fresh squeezed limes, and maybe a little Topo Chico on there. Ranch water, some people call it too.
Right.
But it goes extremely well and doesn't overpower the brisket. It lets the brisket, that's the key thing is you want the brisket to win.
I've heard people cooking brisket in tequila before.
Oh yeah, for certain.
Yeah, I have to try that. So you mentioned one of my favorite people, Dave Morgan, as your Yoda.
Yes.
Besides the occasional riddle that he sometimes gives, what is the most impactful lesson he taught you? And did he ever actually say, do or do not, there is no try?
So one is...
I would have done that in a Yoda voice, but I can't.
Do or do not. Yes. So,
Now I have to get Dave Morgan with Yoda ears for this.
Totally. So one is I could spend a whole podcast on Dave Morgan, but, look,
Right.
I think there are
have,
people...
twice.
Yes. So what I'd sort of say about Dave is very simple. Dave lives his values. And if you watch Dave, he really does. He puts his time and his energy into people and helping our industry and helping the people that are his friends and as well as his coworkers. I think to me, and Dave has been pivotal for me as we were going through, I think the last 5 or 6 years, personally and professionally, have been super challenging. And it's really nice to talk to somebody who's gone through it. Dave successfully exited on a couple of companies. He also, aspires, none of us have well-balanced lives, but he integrates all the facets of Dave. And I think that, Dave has taught me a lot about that. But I think at the end of the day, Dave subscribes to some very similar views that I have, which is you got to look yourself in the mirror and know that you're doing the best you can. And so I feel very strongly that, that he's an example. He's a role model. And I think I try to model a lot of my behavior around his behavior. And he's magnanimous with his advice as well as his true support. He's curious and interested and also takes the time to spend his energy on people. And those are all things that I really value.
So has he ever made you carry him on his back while jogging?
No.
He loves to jog.
Well,
he
so
loves
it's funny.
to jog.
So I have a very funny Dave Morgan story. So Dave came down to Texas, and we went out to East Texas. We've got a place out there, and I drove him around the property, which at the time it had rained a lot. And so Dave and I had gone we went for a long hike that morning, went back, took a shower, and then I took him on a tour of the property. I didn't know, but I went through like a massive puddle in the ATV, and looked like a tidal wave overcoming us, and we completely we got head to toe mud. And I looked at Dave, and he looked at me, and
you have to have a photo.
I do, and we just laughed our asses off. And that's
you're
Dave.
You're going to send it to
me
so I can show it. You got to.
Absolutely, it's really, really funny, and it was an amazing experience. But Dave just kind of went with it. And we were both okay with it, and it was funny.
So, changing a little bit, when conflicts bubble up like an overshaken soda, how do you keep the mess contained? Are you the calm voice of reason, or are you the one handing out the paper towels?
I'm probably handing out the paper towels because I'm probably the most emotional of certainly the core team that I worked with at Camelot, and I'd certainly say here at PMG, I think I'd be perceived on the more emotional side. I think at the end of the day, it's funny. It's a golden rule. Do unto others as you would have, done to you. It's very simple. And I just try to treat people the way I want to be treated. And everyone wants to be treated like a human, and dignified. And I try to treat people that way. So it's very straightforward.
Is laughter the best medicine or a Band-Aid?
It's the best medicine, for certain. For certain. And laughing at yourself, the most important of them all. So... particularly as a leader, if you can't laugh at yourself, you got real issues.
Yeah, I was just talking to someone, I forgot who was yesterday at one of the meetings. They said that everyone in the Adtech industry just takes themselves too seriously.
Very much so.
And that we need to stop it.
Well, look, that's the piece of this is that, as soon as you start believing your own stuff, that's when the problems begin. You have to have a sense of humor. Well, it's funny. So Matt Barish and I we were in Cannes together, and afterwards he and I went to Germany. Right. We went to the UEFA in Germany, and so we went to a couple soccer games, and we had a lot of time walking around Cologne and Frankfurt. And he asked me, he sort of said, what's your biggest observation from Cannes? And I said, look, I can't get over how unhappy our industry is. We're in like the most unhappy industry around right now. And so he put something out on X about it, and
right.
And he's like, observation from Cannes. He's got much more of a platform than I do. And so what I would sort of say is, like, I think we do have a lot of unhappy people in our business. And the reason is that people feel that they don't have control right now in this business, and that, there are things being done in this industry. It's not the same. And what I'd sort of say to you right now is there's going to be a massive deforestation, but there's going to be reforestation coming. And again, when you ask me about what I tune in and tune out, I'm tuning out things that I don't think are going to be here 3 years from now. I really do. And I don't know if I can give you all the criteria of those things, but generally, I can tell, or I have a pretty good sense of who's not going to be there. But the reforestation piece, if we focus on innovation and where the puck is going, that's way more interesting. And I think a lot of people in our business want it to be like the good old days, and it's not. It's never going to be the same. So you got to adapt.
So let's move on. Let's picture this. You're shipwrecked on a desert island with your top 5 industry pals. Who are they? And is this the start of a think tank paradise or the world's strangest reality show?
It's probably a little bit of both. So it's funny you should say this. Dave and I have talked about having the East Texas Media Summit, and Dave Morgan would definitely be there. Matt Barish would be there. I love Allison Lovin. I think she's incredible. She's at NBC. I think I'm trying to think of other folks that I just get a kick out of. I've had some good adventures with Peter Naylor. I think he's an awful lot of fun. And then, I think I would put Jonah Goodhart on there as well. And that would round it out pretty well. I mean, some combination of corporate folks and entrepreneurs, and people also that don't take themselves too seriously and have fun and are good people.
So who's building the shelter and who's on campfire duty story duty?
Oh, there's no question. By the way, Dave is, I think, the Boy Scout
right.
for certain of the group. So Dave would build the shelter. There's no question. Now, Mount Barish and I may call Uber Eats on that island. And so, there's an Uber Eats boat that would come and give us food.
Imagine a heated debate breaks out. What is it over? Best marketing strategy or who gets the last piece of fruit?
I think it's who gets the last piece of fruit for certain. But it's the fruit to go into tequila. I think that's the question. Where's the fruit going? If it's going into tequila, it's definitely over the fruit.
So who's the natural peacemaker?
Peter Naylor, for certain. I don't know.
And where's he? What company is he with?
Well, he was most recently with Netflix.
Right. Oh, Peter Naylor. Sorry. I thought you were saying Mailer for some reason. Right. Peter Naylor. Sorry.
Yeah. He's definitely a peacemaker.
Yeah.
How can you not? I mean, that dude is as chill as they come.
What is one ingenious idea the group might cook up while stranded? A new business idea or just maybe a way off the island?
I think we would all look for a way off on the island. I think, Dave would swim it and then post it in LinkedIn. That's for certain.
And Facebook.
Yes, exactly. I think we would all work on it, but I think it would be very funny to see the corporate people, versus the entrepreneurs. It would be really interesting to sort of see how that works out. It would definitely have a Survivor-like effect.
Here's the hard question. Let's just say a rescue ship arrives, but it's really small. It can only take 3 of you. How do you decide who goes? Drawing straws or a spirited game of charades?
I'd go with charades. That group would definitely go with charades. Definitely.
A Survivor-style council meeting?
Yes, of course. Absolutely. And, Matt Barish, I could see him banging the gong for that meeting. So
right.
That was his role.
So let's just say you get back to civilization. What's the first story you share at a conference? Will we see a TED Talk entitled From Castaways to Innovators? Yeah,
well, you would see a TED Talk. I think the first thing would be, something to the effect of, Dave Morgan saying, I've helped the Ukraine and I've now gotten off an island. And so we definitely would have, that as an exposition. But I think we would be crowning Allison Lovin, the champion of our island, as the person who steered us. I have a lot of faith in her judgment. And so ultimately, we'd be celebrating Allison as our fearless leader.
So what's the one takeaway you take from this hypothetical island adventure that you bring into your professional life, besides packing a better emergency kit?
Adtech does not matter in the scheme of things.
Well, especially on an island.
Yes.
So let's lift the curtain a little bit. So Sam, Netflix, if your life were a Netflix series, what would it be called? Breaking Ads or Game of Phones? And what's the plot of episode 1? Should we bring popcorn or tissues?
It would definitely be breaking ads, and I would bring popcorn. There's no question. I mean, I've had such a funny career, and I worked for Mark Cuban for 4 years. I worked at Blockbuster. I've been in the ad business, and there's so many characters in our business that, I mean, you could easily, between all the people I've worked for, they themselves would be like, Better Call Saul. I mean, you got a whole bunch of spinoffs that could be very interesting.
Is it binge-worthy, or do we need a weekly support group to discuss?
Well, I don't know if it's either. That's a really good question. I don't know if my life is that interesting. I think that some of the characters that I've been around are way more interesting than me. So that may be binge-worthy.
So what's a guilty pleasure that you indulge that might surprise everyone? And don't worry, we're all friends here. Well, at least for now.
Look, I mean, so my wife and I are definitely TV people. And rom-coms are definitely on our TV. Most recent one, have you watched Nobody Wants This, by the way?
Nobody Wants
This. It's the story of a shiksa and a rabbi, and they're dating. It's really funny.
Yes, I've seen the previews, yeah.
Really cute. So my wife is Catholic, I am Jewish, so any rom-com that involves, the religious dimension, we get a kick out of.
Yeah, there was one from Ben Stiller about 20 years ago, wasn't there also?
That's right, Keeping the Faith. That's right. So it was written by Ed Norton and directed by Ed Norton. And you have some pretty famous people in that, by the way. Jenna Elfman, Milos Forman. I mean, that was sort of like our dating movie.
Yeah, I have a Ben Stiller story. I was driving down Madison Avenue, and I turned left in the face, and I almost hit the guy. And he put his hands on my truck and stared at me, blue steel. It was the most. And then at first I was looking at this guy, and then after he left, I said, "Oh my goodness, that almost killed Ben Stiller."
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's. If you could relive one moment of your life just to savor or tweak it, what would it be? A big game-winning save or something more epic? For example, you nailed a skateboard trick from your youth.
Boy, that's an interesting one. I'll tell you. So, in my early 20s, I lived in Paris. For about 2.5 years. And I would probably go do that just because it was an amazing time before I was wildly overconnected.
With or without the wife?
Without the wife. I was not married at that point. So knowing what I know now, I would probably have been way more successful than I was at the time. French women and American guys, by the way, I'm simple. And I think American men in general are perceived as being very simple. I would figure out how to be way more charming than I was then, if that's possible.
So, if you could have any dinner with any historical figure, dead or alive, who would it be? And no pressure, try not to pick someone who critiqued your table manners.
I've thought about that quite a bit, actually. I think I go back in my head a little bit. I mean, from Martin Luther King to a JFK to one of our founding fathers. I mean, I have a lot of questions. I mean, a lot more questions about sort of the formation of our country and pivotal times in our country with people who kind of shaped at those times. So, but it's a good question. I think it would be Mr. Kennedy, Mr. Washington or Mr. Lincoln or, whoever. But I would just listen.
So when did you experience the biggest growth spurt in your career, and what was behind it? Was it a specific challenge, a breakthrough project, or maybe a lesson that finally clicked and changed everything for you?
I think for me, almost all the lessons have come around kind of massive failures for certain. We talked about my soccer. I mean, my identity was all wrapped up in soccer until I got to college and realized there were multiple people better than me. So learning how to love the game and play the game just for the love of the game and not trying to, be all world. That was a huge lesson for me. I think living abroad, huge lesson for me. I think, broadcast.com, even though it was really successful, that actually wasn't a great lesson. It was actually working at iChoose, the company afterwards. We blew through $25 million. So, there's no question that, licking your wounds teaches you a lot more. I don't know if I want to relive those experiences. And by the way, working at Blockbuster was really hard. I had a very difficult boss, and it was a very difficult time in that business. So, I mean, all those things were formative for me in ways I didn't understand then, but I understand now for certain. stepping stones for certain.
So, as the credits roll on this episode of Sam Unfiltered, what legacy do you hope to leave behind? And not to get mushy, what is the headline you'd love to see on your future biography?
I think so. We had a very simple expression at Camelot in our kitchen that said, "Leave it better than you found it." And I think that's at the end of the day. I mean, I think when I think that's sort of been my take, but I'd also say, he's a great member of the team. And I think at the end of the day, I've always sort of viewed myself not as an individual, but a part of a team. And that goes back to my soccer roots. So,
And that's a wrap with Sam Bloom, marketing maestro, sports aficionado, and occasional mud-splattered adventurer. Who else can juggle Dallas Stars fandom, victory plus innovation, and the circus of Adtech without breaking a sweat? Okay, maybe a little sweat. Before we sign off, a big thanks to our sponsors. Origin, the geniuses turning CTV chaos into gold. Seriously, they're like the MacGyvers of streaming ads. And Troutman Amon, the folks who make compliance sound downright exciting. You keep the lights on and the mics rolling. Until next time, stay bold, stay curious, and know more than you did yesterday.
Me and my friends dance until we drop.